The Russians who came to rebuild Crimea after World War II turned out to be completely helpless in the face of the problems that befell them. The devastation on the peninsula was especially severe. The population had been cut in half. To restore life in Crimea, thousands of citizens from other regions of the USSR, mostly from Russia, were sent to the peninsula. They are lured here with promises of resort-like conditions, a warm climate and the sea. And wine. The reality turns out to be somewhat different. The colonists are settled in the abandoned huts of the deported Tatars with no warning about the arid climate. It turns out that in such conditions it is impossible to grow the grain crops familiar to northerners. The shortage of water was felt especially acutely since rain is rare in Crimea and there are practically no full-flowing rivers. The Crimean Tatars had solved this problem, skillfully building wells. The colonists from Russia, however, had no experience in obtaining water in these unfamiliar natural conditions, and there was no one to teach them, since all the Tatars had already been deported by that time. Sometimes, in difficult situations, they even had to ask the higher authorities to send at least one Tatar to show them how to obtain water. Instead of restoring the peninsula, the Russian settlers only managed to worsen the already dire state of Crimea. The economy, and especially agriculture, fell into a state of complete decline. Once fertile lands gradually turned into a depressed region. Information about this began to reach Moscow. Nikita Khrushchev's son-in-law, journalist Alexei Ajubey, recalled that when the first secretary learned about the situation in Crimea, he personally, without warning, soon went to Crimea to check the situation on the ground. What struck and upset Nikita Sergeyevich the most were the crowds of resettlers who, by some means, had heard about his trip. A silent grey mass of people blocked the road and also silently, without moving aside, waited for the cars to stop. The people burdened and for a long time did not start the conversation, giving Khrushchev the opportunity to speak first. Then, from the crowd, one question would be heard, then a second, a third, about food, housing and assistance. The resettlers had mostly come from Russia, from the Volga region and the northern Russian provinces. Now I write, had come. But they shouted, "We were driven here." The familiar lament of people who have lost hope of finding a secure fate. There were even hysterical outbursts from the crowd. "Potatoes don't grow here, cabbage withers." Or suddenly something even sadder. "The bedbugs have eaten us alive." "Then why did you come?" Khrushchev would ask. And the crowd would sigh. We were deceived. After such meetings, a heavy silence would fall in the car. Malenkov and Khrushchev would avert their eyes from each other, afraid of a possible quarrel. I could feel that Khrushchev was boiling with anger and was about to snap, but he would either calm down or play it sly. He hid his anger inside. He was saving it for the future. That same evening, as the Muscovites were looking for a place to spend the night, Nikita Sergeyevich noticed a small military airfield not far from the highway and ordered the car to turn toward it. There he found an old Douglas airplane. Upon learning that the plane was still operational, Khrushchev left his entourage behind and flew to Kyiv. A few hours later, Ajubey recounts, they were already there. The capital of Ukraine greeted the distinguished guest with joyful cheers that never ceased. I remember that the door was torn off the car meant to transport the guests. Late in the evening, Kyiv's leaders gathered at the Mariinsky Palace. The dinner was lively and noisy. Toasts followed one after another. Khrushchev kept returning to his trip to Crimea and urged the Ukrainians to help revive the land. They need southerners there, people who love orchards and corn, not potatoes, he lamented. Most likely, even then during that trip, Khrushchev conceived the idea of transferring Crimea to Ukraine. Otherwise, the peninsula would have turned into a real desert. At that time, Ukraine was still the breadbasket of the Union. It was assigned the task of revitalizing the depressed region. Within a few years, tens of thousands of volunteers from the southern regions arrived on the peninsula. And just 2 years after Crimea was transferred to Ukraine, Iron ore extraction on the peninsula increased by 36%, electricity production by 57%, and wine production by 104%. Gradually, livestock farming revived, and vineyards and orchards flourished. By the way, another economic reason for transferring the peninsula was the construction of the North Crimean Canal and the irrigation of the steppe regions of northern Crimea. It was easier to manage this process from Kiev, where all the materials were supplied from. The official reason for the annexation was declared to be the 300th anniversary of the Pereyaslav Rada, supposedly a symbol of the union between the two brotherly peoples, Ukrainians and Russians. A symbol, of course, according to Russian and Soviet historians. In reality, there was no union of so-called brotherly peoples. Ukrainians fought with Russians both before and after the Pereyaslav Rada. This is a very interesting topic, and a video about it is already being prepared by our channel's editorial team. In addition to the socio-economic aspects, there is also a theory that Crimea became a testing ground for intra-party struggles. At the time, Dmitry Shepilov, a member of the Central Committee of the CPSU, even accused Khrushchev of pandering to Ukraine in his memoirs. But almost everyone supported the idea of transferring the peninsula, except for the first deputy chairman of the Council of Ministers of the USSR, Vyacheslav Molotov. A few years later, it was Molotov who would lead the group that unsuccessfully tried to remove Khrushchev from his position as head of the USSR. But one way or another, nothing changes the fact that Crimea truly flourished with Ukraine, becoming a real jewel. Some people, especially in Russia, sometimes try to dispute this, saying that the revival of Crimea was supposedly a collective effort of the entire Soviet Union, and that Ukraine had no special role in it. Such comrades should be reminded that in the USSR, collective meant nobodies. And the attempt at an all-Union restoration of Crimea immediately after the war ended in a complete failure. And this was mainly due to the settlers who came from Russia. The very course of historical events shows that without Ukraine and Ukrainians, Crimea cannot exist. The current situation of the peninsula under Russia's incompetent control is a perfect example of this. It serves as undeniable and truly excellent evidence. And in fact, all of this is because Crimea does not need Russians. Crimea needs Ukrainians.
Now we're moving to Stockholm because the 4th Parliamentary Summit of the Crimea Platform is taking place there. And now Bohdan Olejnik is joining us live. We have just a few minutes left until the end of our broadcast. Bohdan, the floor is yours. Hello. Tanya, hello, and greetings to our viewers. On the United News Marathon right here, right now in the Swedish Parliament, the Riksdag. The 4th Parliamentary Summit of the Crimea Platform has begun. Before the summit opened, the national anthems of Ukraine and Sweden were played. In fact, the Ukrainian anthem was performed by Taimo Veselishin. He was born in Ukraine and now lives in Sweden. And every week he makes it a point to express his steadfast support and actively assist our country by attending rallies where he stands with others and demonstrates his dedication. Furthermore, before the official opening even started, he was already present, making sure to show his commitment and enthusiasm for the event. A video was shown to the delegates about the occupation of Crimea by the Russian Federation in 2014, as well as how the Russians used the peninsula for the full-scale invasion in 2022. The first to speak was Andreas Norlén, the Speaker of the Riksdag. He expressed support for Ukraine's struggle for independence and territorial integrity. So please listen to him. We must be ready not only to support Ukraine's fight for freedom, but also to be prepared to defend all of Europe from Russian aggression, which threatens the territorial integrity of our countries as well. Together, we are stronger than the enemies of democracy and freedom. For example, the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, addressed the participants via video link. The head of state mainly called on partners not to remain silent, not to be passive observers of history, but to be, above all, its participants. Keep putting pressure on Russia. Russia still kills people every day.
People The occupied territories remain under occupation, and this means that Russia remains a criminal state. Today, almost 17 parliamentary delegations are present here, and if the parliaments of Europe and the world do not turn a blind eye to this, then no one else will. Thank you for your support.
Meanwhile, the head of the Verkhovna Rada, Ruslan Stefanchuk, in his welcoming speech, emphasized that Ukraine has always wanted to move toward a just and lasting peace, but at the same time, he outlined Ukraine's key principles and priorities.
We must clearly define Ukraine's red lines, which no one has the right to cross, neither physically nor legally, nor morally. No legal recognition of the Russian occupation of Ukrainian territories. No restrictions on the defense forces of Ukraine. No veto on Ukraine's right to choose its future alliances. Any genuine peace process must be based on a very clear principle. Nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. Nothing about Europe without Europe.
Meanwhile, Sweden's Minister for Foreign Affairs, Maria Stenegard, stated that Stockholm will never recognize the illegally fortified territories of Ukraine. Right now, participants of the Crimea platform are speaking, some at the podium, some via video link. So we will continue to follow this and will inform our viewers of all the details in due course. Tanya, over to you. Bogdan, I'm taking the floor in order to pass it to our colleagues. Bogdan Olenik, our correspondent,